Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our Best Practices in Online Course Design webinar with the Frankfort Center. I am Kenny Hirschmann. I'm the manager of the Frankfort Center, and I have here with me Dr. Gina Riley. Would you like to say hello?
Hi. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
And so we will be facilitating the session, and we'd like to welcome you to on this beautiful day. And we'll just jump right in, get started. Let me share my screen. Why don't I see it? Ah, there it is. Okay, so do you see the... Okay, good. I see heads bobbing yes and no. Great. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is, how do we design courses online so that, they're specifically, the intention is in there to teach in a completely online format. It's a little different than teaching face-to-face. So we want to kind of walk you through some of the things that you really need to be thinking about when focusing on creating this online learning environment. So the things we're going to cover today are how to create the course environment, doing assessment online, engaging learners online, and then some other additional considerations. And then, we'll take questions as we go through, and there'll be some time at the end for some questions as well. Okay. So if you have specific concerns or questions that are sparked by what you're seeing or what we're talking about, please feel free to post them in the chat, or if it's you can also feel free to just kind of interrupt us, as long as it doesn't get out of hand, and then I'll put a kibosh on that. All right. So starting with creating the course environment. It's really important, even in face-to-face learning, that, but even more so in online learning, that the learning be focused around the learner. And the reason why this is even more important in an online environment is because a lot of the learning that happens online happens on their own. It happens in a self-directed way. And because of that, it has to even be more tuned into what the learners need. So focusing your designs around the learner is really important. One way of also achieving that similar effect is by focusing what you're doing on the desired results. So the outcomes. And there's specific language that you can use to develop outcomes, and there's resources that we have on our website that can help you do that. I'm less concerned about the language around it, but more concerned about the focus on those outcomes as your starting point. That's why we call this backwards design, because we want to start with what we hope to achieve, or what we hope students to be able to achieve in our course. Once we know what we want students to achieve, we can develop assessments that measure whether that's happening or not. And then once we know how we're assessing students, we can create a series of activities and learning experiences that scaffold the learning toward achieving those objectives, achieving those outcomes, and being able to do well on those assessments. Obviously we want students to do well because that is a sign that they've achieved the outcomes that we're looking for. So that's the order in which backwards design takes place. So some of you may be familiar with this already. It's also called understanding by design by, who is it, McTeague and...
Wiggins.
Wiggins and McTeague, thank you. I don't know why I don't have the attribution there, but thank you. Another thing to think about, I'm kind of going through this quickly because this is really the foundational theoretical components that really make up the thought process behind what you need to be doing. But there's also a large practical component that we really want to dive a little deeper into. So I'm just trying to cover the bases. But if you have questions or if there's something that you don't understand, please stop me, and I'm happy to go over it in more depth. So the community of inquiry framework, this is, I find, to be one of the most pivotal uh, conceptual frameworks for online learning. And the reason why I think it's such a strong framework is it really covers all the bases of how students learn and what needs to be done in that online space in order to create the environment for that learning to happen. So you can see here in the community of inquiry framework, there's three main components of it. There's cognitive presence, there's social presence, and there's teaching presence. Social presence, which is absolutely critical to be able to establish in the online space, because it's not something that happens naturally on its own. It's something that has to have a lot of intention. So what we're talking about with social presence is the ability to express oneself, to express their authentic self, to express themselves affectively, through emotion and feelings, to have open communication that helps to foster this shared identity, and then to also develop a sense of cohesion within the group for collaborative purposes. So again, these are elements that don't necessarily happen naturally in the online space. And it's something that you have to work at creating. And we'll give you some ideas of how to do that. Gina, maybe you even want to chime in at any point if you have something to add in relation to this. But just certain things like, for example, icebreaker activities, introducing oneself, talking about something in your life, making things personal, that gives the opportunity to humanize the experience. Utilizing video as another example. So tools like Flipgrid or VoiceThread, where you get to see somebody's face and hear their voice, it creates this social presence. It creates a more humanizing experience within the course. Teaching presence is similar, except social presence is more about the student-to-student interaction, whereas teaching presence is more about the student to instructor interaction. And this happens in a variety of different ways. So one is through the social presence of the teacher, and that can be through video, through video lecture, through engagement in the discussion forums. But more specifically, it's in the design and administration of the learning environment. So it's the ecosystem of platforms that are utilized, it's how they are utilized, it's how the course is structured and navigated. All of that, it lends itself to feeling like this experience has been customized for me by the instructor, that there's somebody behind the curtain that's engaged with creating this experience for me, rather than it just being for example, utilizing all the default settings, just throwing content up into Blackboard or Google Classroom without any sort of structure or organization or thought about how students will receive that. That's a big difference between that and having fully structured modules that take the students sequentially through the course and kind of hold their hands. That's what teaching presence is all about in that respect. Facilitation of discussion, and that can happen through different means, through discussion forums, through synchronous discussion. What kinds of techniques are employed? How are you engaging students? How are you engaging them in conversations? Is it interactive enough? Is it one-way communication? Is it two-way communication? Or is it more networked communication? So the various strategies that you employ will establish your presence as a teacher, as an instructor in the course. And then finally, direct instruction. So That's giving feedback, that's how you scaffold the content, that is differentiating the content and delivering the content, whether that be through lecture or through other means, but it's the direct instruction that's coming from you, as opposed to the content that students are consuming on their own, which is more within the cognitive presence realm. So that's enabling and empowering students to construct meaning within the course, using prompts and things like that that allow students to reflect and to dig deeper into the meaning of what it is that they're studying, to use discourse and discovery as a means for learning and also reflection. So it's not just simply passive consumption. And then finally, the shaping of the learning journey. So, these things overlap, and you can see in the Venn diagram in the center that, there's an overlap between cognitive presence and teaching presence. So, the shaping of the learning journey is really, the scaffolding process. It's the sequencing of content and the relationship between the content and the assessments and how that builds. So you can see that in the Venn diagram that overlap right there is in the content selection process, but it goes a little deeper than that. The overlap between teaching and social presence is how you set the climate. Are you setting ground rules for discussion? Are you creating an inclusive environment in a variety of ways? And that can also be through selecting content. And then the cognitive and social presence overlap is in supporting discourse. And then the overlap of all three elements is the whole educational experience. Gina, do you want to add anything to that?
I think a lot of us think of when we're in person, creating our classroom structure, right? Our space, our classroom culture. And in an online environment, we have to do the same thing. So we have to establish for our students and for ourselves a classroom culture. We have to establish a classroom space in a virtual environment.
Absolutely. So a couple of more frameworks to look at. So because we're fully online, it's really important to think about how we integrate technology into how we're teaching online. We can use just the basics. It could be just entirely synchronous, and we're using Zoom and not much else. Maybe posting some resources into Blackboard or Google Classroom, but really the focus of our class is synchronous and in a tool like Zoom. Or it could be more eclectic. There could be a variety of different platforms. It could be a combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning, where the tools are utilized to not just deliver content or not just facilitate communication, but to really enhance and extend the learning in a variety of different ways. So there's this framework here called the Triple E framework, which I found in April at a conference that I attended, and I just thought it was really fantastic. So the Triple E is extend, enhance, and engage. And it's really focused, again, on learning goals. So it comes back to that backwards design process. You start with your learning goals. You don't start with the tools. The goals drive the tools and the activities. This particular framework does draw on a body of research. It's a reliable and valid framework, and it provides a model because for K-12, the K-12 environment, because that's where its focus is. So the first stage of this is the engage portion. So this is really where you're trying to engage students with their learning goals, and what technology will support that. Primarily, we're talking about the LMS and perhaps synchronous tools like Zoom. It's the meat and potatoes. It's the core of your online experience. And there's some questions here, and we'll give you access to this presentation. It'll be posted online with the recording. So you can come back and look at this some more. But there are some questions you can ask yourself. Does the technology allow students to focus on the task? with less distraction? Does the technology motivate students to start the learning process? And these are the questions that will help you reflect on whether or not the technology you're employing serves the purpose that you have, which is why you have to start with the goal. You need to have a purpose in mind before you decide what technology will do that. And then you can use these questions to reflect on whether or not that technology is serving the purpose you have intended. The next one is enhance. So this is taking it to kind of another level. You have your core, which is the engage. Enhance is tools that somehow um, take things, can allow you to do things in a way that can't be done using other methods. Um, so certain tools allow you some options that you're not going to get in a basic LMS. Some polling tools, for example, some differentiation tools or adapted learning tools can help you to do certain things. VoiceThread or Flipgrid allow you to do video discussions and video presentations that you can't do in the basic tools. So this just enhances the learning experience through additional technology, and these are the questions that you really want to think about when you're reflecting on whether or not it's appropriate. Does the tool aid students in developing or demonstrating more sophisticated understanding of the content? That's an important one, because if it doesn't, why are you doing it?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. If you don't have a purpose for the tool, and if the tool isn't useful in some way to your students, don't use it. Like, just don't use tools to throw out tools. Use tools constructively.
Yeah. Um, and then, you know, the scaffolding is important too, because it also suggests that, you know, if you're only going to use a tool once, that's not scaffolding anything. And you're placing a burden on the students to learn a new tool, to get comfortable in a tool, to only use it once. Now, there are times where it's appropriate because it may be that using that tool or getting that experience with the tool is the purpose. You know, I can certainly see that as appropriate in some SPED classes for assistive technology and things like that. You may not use the tool more than once, but that's the whole point, is that you're just trying to familiarize yourself with a number of different tools. An educational technology class might be another example of how that would be appropriate. But generally speaking, if you're going to employ a tool for enhancement, you want to use it multiple times. That doesn't mean you have to use it every week, but at least, you know, 2, 3, 4 times throughout the semester to make it worth the while.
I have found that students like routines. Routine of something, they can just go right into it,
Yes.
which is probably what you mean, because they're used to this tool, they know the routine of it, and they can just get into the content and what you're going to do with it. Gina, your audio is not great. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Kenny, if you mute, is the audio better?
Oh,
Or is it just mine that's in that background? Can you guys hear me now? Better? Yeah. Okay. I think it's Kenny's background mute. Okay. No problem. Thanks.
all right. I'll just try to pay attention when you're speaking and remember to mute myself. So the last part of this framework is extend. Um, and again, and this is technology that extends the learning into the real world. So it allows for community engagement. It allows for collaborative engagement. Uh, and this may not be appropriate for every course, but there are tools that facilitate this kind of engagement. Service learning is another example of where this might be appropriate. So does the technology create opportunities for students to learn outside of their typical school day? We don't really have a typical school day right now. Does this technology create a bridge between school learning and everyday life experiences? This could also be something as simple as a journal, other ways of kind of drawing the real world into the class rather than necessarily creating a direct connection, such as you know, um, uh, engaged learning or a service learning opportunity. So, setting the course climate. We mentioned this earlier. Um, Gina, do you want to talk a little bit about this? And I'll mute myself.
Okay. So I think throughout, when you set this course climate, it is really important that you create the kind of online classroom that you want to create. When I'm creating my online classes, I'm very, very particular with regards to the style and the type of classroom I want to create. Sometimes learning management systems help. So sometimes people prefer Google Classroom because it gives them the style and the creation that they want to create. Other people prefer Blackboard. I use both depending upon the class. So do determine your priorities, do determine your sets. So your syllabus, right? Make sure your syllabus sets the course climate, because the syllabus in an online learning platform becomes an important part of this. Make sure your online classroom creates this course climate or classroom culture that you want to create. I tend to be like a very like, hello, happy Wednesday, woo woo type person. And I promise you that if you go into my online class, you're going to feel that same energy. You're still going to feel the hi, happy Wednesday. It's the same thing, just in an online format. And I really pay particular attention to that. You also want to make sure everything within your course is clear. That begins with the syllabus. You know, again, we need to reframe and reformat our syllabi for online learning, and that extends into the course. So when you're giving instructions or when you're giving announcements, those expectations have to be super clear. It saves you time in the long run, because if they're not super clear, what's going to happen is you're going to get like 15 emails with questions saying, I didn't understand this. So it's really important that your expectations, that your syllabi and your instruction is super clear. Also note, you're going to see different things in your students with regards to online learning. If you know some of your students already, know you're going to see different strengths in them online. And it's really important to pay heedance to that, right? I have one of my students, it was very interesting. All the time I'm thinking, yeah, her discussion board postings are great, but they don't like have that real like girth that I want them to. And I'm giving her feedback throughout. Then we had a video assignment, which completely blew me out of the water. She created a video, she had costumes. I mean, she was incredible. So sometimes you're going to see different strengths in your online students, and we do need to honor those strengths. Along with teacher or instructor presence, you also have to make sure that there is, as Kenny said, a classroom presence, that individuals are not only talking to the teacher or the instructor, but also talking amongst themselves. And you can do this using discussion boards, or you can do this using different formats, but we do need to provide students with the feeling of a class. Also, if you want your students to be fully engaged in your course, you have to be fully engaged in your course. So that means the more students get from you, the more you'll get from your students. And you all know this from teaching in person too. Like the more energy and the more time you give to your course, the more it gives back in terms of student participation and things like that. Same thing online. If you expect your students to be online 3 days a week, you better be online 3 days a week. If you expect your students to be online every day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday, then you need to do that too. I really create a format where students know exactly when I'm going to be online, exactly what days, and I tend to be online every day except for Saturday, and I give a structure to the class. So those of you who know me know I always open my classes on Sunday if I'm teaching async. By noon on Sunday, my module's up. And in fact, my students know me so well that if it's not up by noon on Sunday, they're like, is something wrong? Are you okay? Right? So they know that sort of consistency and they depend on it. It's almost like I'm opening my classroom up to them noon on Sunday. And then throughout the week, they see me online responding to discussion board questions, giving feedback on assignments. And so I've created that expectation. You don't have to do that, but all I'm saying is create the expectation that you want to keep. So let your students know when they should expect you to be online, let your students know when they should be expected to receive feedback, and let your students know exactly when you plan to do everything. So that clarity is really important, and we'll talk about clarity later on too. Yeah, here's my 3 C's. Look at that, so timely. So my 3 C's in terms of online learning is always consistency, clarity, and communication. The more consistent you are with regards to how you format and design your online week, the more students engage. Students know what to expect, right? I just taught a 5-week intensive. Again, my format is always the same. I open everything up on Sundays. I open the module or the week up on Sundays. I am online throughout the week except for Saturday, and students know that they're going to get feedback, complete feedback and grades on Monday. So there's a feedback cycle, right? You open the module Sunday, you have all week, everyone's participating, including myself, and then all grades and comments are given on Monday. That consistency creates a really nice structure for students. Also, with regards to clarity, again, like we keep putting this and saying this, but it's important. The clearer you are with expectations, with your syllabi, with announcements, the better the experience is going to be for everyone. Also, communication. You want your students to communicate with you, and you also want them to communicate with each other. So format ways for them to be able to do that easily. I also give students an alternative mode of communication. So for example, students know that they can email me or they can call or text me if they have any questions. And that alternate mode just creates an alternate space, and I've never had a student abuse it. So anything you can do to open up communication with your students is going to be helpful. Interestingly, right, we have so many options now with regards to what we can use. We have options with regard to learning management systems. So you can use Google Classroom or Blackboard. We have options with regards to tools. There are hundreds of tools out there you can use, and sometimes it gets confusing. What I would say is use tools very intentionally. And I almost have a rule, and I keep it probably 98% of the time, that I only use one tool at a time. And that for me, I cycle through a tool a month. So if I'm going to use Padlet, we're going to use it for the month on some assignment. Or if I'm going to use Mentimeter for polls, I'm going to use that for the month. Students get used to it and they use it in their own classrooms. We have to know that now we not only have a responsibility toward our teacher candidates in terms of teaching classes, but we also want to model them good online teaching strategies because they're going to be doing it themselves, and they are doing it themselves. So we want to be able to make them comfortable with tools. Also, note that our learners, because we're a graduate school of education, are going to be multi-generational. And some of them are going to have specific likings to specific formats and specific tools. And that may have to do with the generation they grew up in, or it may have to do with something else. But like, so for example, millennials really like immediate feedback, and your baby boomers, they're fine with just having some sort of connection to the professor that feels real and alive. So there are differences in terms of multi-generational needs. I highly recommend the book Remix. It's a really good book on multi-generational learners and workers. And so we do need to really think about how we're going to meet all our learners, no matter where they are in life. So those points are very, very important. In terms of module, most of you, I think probably all of you here know how to create an online module, have been to either module making camp in ACERT, or have been with Kenny for a long time and really know how to construct a module. I will say that a well-developed module will have specific things in it. And if you're working within Blackboard or Google Classroom, note that I'm always containing these things in my module. The first is the learning outcomes. And this is how I think online learning might be actually richer than in-class learning. I think sometimes when we're in class, we're not specifically thinking about outcomes. Online, if you create them and you post them, you're almost forced to think about them. Second thing is assessments. We can very, very effectively give assessments online. You can give self-grade or quizzes that are graded on Blackboard, graded on Google Classroom. It's very, very easy. Also, rethink what you think about assessments. And I know Kenny's going to talk about formative and summative assessments and like what this looks like online. You know, assessments don't always have to be tests or quizzes. Assessments can be discussion board postings. Assessments can be video-based. Assessments can be a final project that contains images. So really rethink your idea of what assessment may look like in your classroom. The learning materials and activities are so important. I think one of the reasons why I love online learning is I love museums and I love curation. And probably if I wasn't doing this, I would like to curate something, right? So when you're thinking about the online world and your online module, your job is to curate learning materials and activities that really fit that module. So it's not like finding a YouTube video that takes you 5 minutes to find. It's like digging and digging until you find that perfect video or that perfect TED Talk, that perfect image or that perfect article, and really making it applicable to the class and to your learning outcomes. So a lot of this is really good curation, especially if you're teaching an async course. In terms of sequencing, right? That's always a job. Think about how you sequence learning materials. Again, with going back to consistency, my students always know that every week I'm going to sequence things the same way. It's going to be read this, watch this, and listen to this. And sometimes the listening is me lecturing, sometimes the listening is something else. But I stick to that very like read this, watch this, listen to this, and here's how you participate. So using a structure like that each week, again, however you want to make that structure, really creates a place where students feel like it's their classroom. They go on Blackboard and it's their classroom and they know we're going to do this. In terms of utilization of announcements, either on Blackboard or Google Classroom, again, be very, very clear, very, very step by step with what you're asking them to do each week. And again, like I reread these announcements over and over because in the end, I know that it saves me time answering students' emails saying, I'm confused. So it's really, really important to, again, like curate the modules, really think about each week, and really adjust as your students are adjusting. Also, that consistency part, I really promise you that if you're working on one thing with regards to your online learning this term, it should be the consistency. The more consistent you create your course, the more your students feel so much more comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I would also just note that consistency, can be thought of in a lot of different ways, but setting up a consistent structure is one translation of that you might think about, so that in your modules you set up that consistent structure so students know exactly what to expect each week. Okay, we're going to have a discussion, we're going to have an assignment, we're going to have a video to watch and a reading or something like that. And it might change a little bit here and there, but generally speaking, and if it does change, then you have a consistent way of communicating that, so that you have an overview or an agenda, and that in that agenda you lay out all the things that they're doing that are expected of them for that week. Maybe that's the consistency that you're talking about, even if the activities are slightly different. Anyway, as we often do, we still have a lot to cover, and time just keeps going by so quickly. I'm not going to dwell on this because I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term of scaffolding, but I love this visualization for it because I think it really kind of drives it home, and it helps us to begin the discussion of assessment, to think about how formative assessment happens on the way up to the landing, which is where the summative assessments take place, and that's the learning objectives are each of these landings, and the summative assessment is really a measurement of whether or not those objectives or outcomes have been achieved, and the formative assessment is really just, are we on the right track? So speaking of assessment, I just spoke about summative and formative. Generally speaking, formative is going to be a um, uh, lower risk for students, whereas summative is a little bit more anxiety provoking perhaps for students because they know that it counts. And formative and summative can be the same assessment. You can use a summative assessment formatively and vice versa. There's also diagnostic assessment, which often takes place at the beginning of the semester, but it can take place at any point, and it really provides you with some information about where students are in their learning process, what prior knowledge they bring in, what assumptions they bring in, perhaps what misconceptions they bring in, and it gives you the opportunity to maybe start off by correcting some of those assumptions and misconceptions before you even begin the process of covering the content that you're looking to cover, so that everybody starts off on the same page. So for diagnostic assessments, it helps students to become more invested in success from day one. When you are using this process to learn more about the students, it gives them a feeling of security that, okay, my professor's looking out for me and wants to make sure that that I'm coming in with the correct level of skill, with the correct assumptions. It helps students to identify their misconceptions, to place them where they are, so that there's a metacognitive component to this that allows students to self-regulate. It gives the ability to differentiate based on students' goals. It establishes a marker for progress later. I'm a huge proponent of grades being a reflection of progress as opposed to necessarily meeting a particular standard, but that's just me. And then helping students to match up into groups. So if you're looking to do any sort of group work over the course of a semester, diagnostic assessment can really help you to determine how to create those groups if you're not going to allow the students to create them themselves. So examples of this can be an online poll, a survey. It could be through just simple observation of the discussions that take place. And it could be through a concept map that students can generate to help you diagnose what's happening. And again, these three types of assessments can all happen at the same time, or they can be more purposeful. It's really just simply how you are using the information that you're getting from these assessments.
And if, sorry, one comment.
Yes.
Polls and concept maps. So if you are looking for tools with regards to polls and concept maps, a new tool that I've recently discovered and I used all summer, which was amazing, is Mentimeter. So I think it's mentimeter.com. I would use it as an adjunct to your PowerPoint. So I wouldn't build your PowerPoints or your Google Slides into Mentimeter, but I would use Mentimeter. You can use it when you're using Zoom, or you can use it in an async class, but it's really, really a nice tool for polls, surveys, and concept maps.
Thank you. Yeah, Mentimeter is one of my favorites. There's a number of different polling tools that are out there. Many of them are offered for free, at least to a certain point. Same thing with concept map tools, and I have lists and lists and lists and lists of tools that if you're interested, I can point you in the right direction for that.
You mentioned meter. How do you spell that?
MENTI meter.
Mentimeter. All right. Okay. Thank you.
So for formative assessments, again, it helps with students feeling invested in their learning, and to take ownership of it. It gives them an outlet for their concerns. For example, if you are asking for feedback from students, which can be a formative assessment of how the class is going. It's not necessarily a formative assessment of their learning. It could be, but it's also assessment. A formative assessment can be used to give you feedback about how you're doing. So you can have assessment of the teaching that's happening and the learning that's happening in the class. It allows you to make immediate changes. So if you notice that students are not getting a particular concept, it gives you the feedback that you need to be able to address that. It allows students an opportunity to reflect on their learning, which is a component of metacognition. It helps to self-regulate the learning process for students. And then it also gives critical and timely feedback to the instructor, both on the student for what the student learning and also on how the instructor is doing, how you are doing as the instructor. So types of formative assessments can be discussion board questions, minute papers, which are literally just taking a couple of minutes to write stream of thought, polls, low stakes quizzes, group projects can be done formatively, and online exit tickets. So that would be like a short survey that could be related to the content or could be related to something else, could be related to the format of the class, either at the end of a class session or at the end of the semester. Can be done both.
Okay, with the online exit tickets,
Yes.
the problem is with that is it has to be anonymous. No name on it, or it's not as effective.
Yeah, and you can do that. You can use tools like Google.
Once in the spring. All right, let me hear your response. All right.
Yeah, you can use a tool like Google Forms to create an anonymous survey. It doesn't have to be done in an LMS. I think there is a survey tool in Blackboard, for example, but I don't think it's completely anonymous. Gina, do you know?
No, I tend not to use exit tickets per se, um, but that's just my style. It has nothing to do with whether they're effective or not.
Right. And then lastly, we have the summative assessments. So this is, you know, I would say emphasizing progress over grades. I think the literature kind of bears that as well. Giving students an opportunity to reflect on their results. So there's a metacognitive component as well. Am I learning what I'm expecting to learn? Is that reflecting in the results of these assessments? And then sometimes assessments can be used as a tool for learning. So for example, a term paper is an opportunity for learning a particular topic. And then examples of summative assessment can be things such as tests, midterms, final exams, creative projects and papers, so video projects, screencast presentations, just standard term papers, and then e-portfolio is another example of a summative assessment. So learner engagement.
So I'm gonna just quickly say something about the videos and student videos. Again, if you're teaching an async course or even a sync class or even a combination, having students do their own screencasts, having students create their own videos are tools they can then take into their classroom, especially their virtual classroom. So it's a really, at this point in time, students appreciate it. You also get to see the students' faces and get to know the students more. So screencasts are a really nice idea, especially for this time, because they can utilize it into their classroom. In terms of the online week, and I'm always thinking the online week, right? Whether it's sync or async, you have to do a couple of things. So we talked about adjusting your syllabus, and it's not just saying this course is going to be online. It's really looking at every aspect of your syllabi and really thinking about what can I do to create this wonderful, very clear syllabi for an online course. Also, I know a lot of us in the spring semester hopped on to Zoom once our courses were switched over during that period of recalibration, mostly because we didn't know what else to do. And I will say, you know, you don't always have to do a completely sync class. There are many, many ways to do a great class async. There are many, many ways to do a hybrid model where you do sync sometimes, async sometimes. I've done completely async classes with choice lectures where students choose whether they go to the live lecture or not. If not, the lecture is recorded. I've done completely async classes with choice online office hours or conferencing time so that I actually see students via Zoom, but not in a very formal way. So there are different ways to do this. And I would just warn not to lean so heavily on that Zoom, like let's pretend it's a classroom and do it model, because that's not always the most effective. Either way, whatever way you choose should be the way you're comfortable with. And so if you're teaching async, you do have to think about what your online week might look like. And this is purely calendar based. Does it open up on Sunday or does it open up on Monday? Does it end on Saturday or does it end on Sunday? What does that week look like? When can students expect you to open up a week? When can students expect you to be online? And when can students expect you to provide feedback?
Okay. As far as well, I try to schedule everything on the day the course was scheduled, and I try to have it come in on the time. Now sometimes I ran a little behind the time because I wasn't ready. I was trying to make that deadline, but it was around that time it would come out. They were all waiting for it. They knew it was coming soon. So that's one thing. I think that I don't know. Can I change the time from the time the course was scheduled? Is that permissible? Is that acceptable, or should I keep it the time that it was at? If I meet on Thursdays, whatever time, 5 o'clock, should I keep it that time? 5:10. All right. Should I keep it at that time, or do I have the authority to change that? I mean.
So we just got a note from our chair, and I'm sure it will be communicated that, you know, we will soon be asked what format the course will be given in, what times and days the course will meet at. And so that information is going to be important to give to your chairs. If you created a meeting time on CUNY first, students expect it probably to be sync and for you to stick to that meeting time. If you created no meeting time and said it was an async course and the notes on CUNY first, then students will expect that. So it really does have a lot to do with the way you've communicated with your chair how the course is going to look. And I know that they're going to be asking which way your course is going to look as well. You know, I think that if you are teaching sync, right? So if you are teaching via Zoom, what does the structure of your sync meeting look like? So how do you take attendance? When do you take attendance? What does content look like? Does it look like direct lecture for the first half hour and then you're going to go do something else? I will warn that it's very, very difficult to stick to a complete Zoom session with direct lecture for 3 hours. It's also not good teaching practice, right? So you don't want to lecture for 3 hours so that students are just looking at you and they have no discussion or anything like that. Same thing in the classroom. So you do want to, if you're teaching in a sync way via Zoom, you do want to think about what the structure of your sync meeting looks like when you take attendance, when you do cover content regarding direct lecture, when you do group work using breakout rooms, and then what do they do?
Okay.
That kind of format's important.
I conducted that whole half semester on Blackboard. I didn't do any of the video. But however, I think the first class should be done on Zoom to introduce yourself.
Again, totally your style. I've done completely async courses where I introduce myself via async video and it totally works out fine. So again, you just have to establish your own style and make sure you communicate that style with your chair. And I think the communication piece is really important. Also, like, what does your participation online look like? Whether your course is sync or async or a mix. When will you be giving feedback? How much do you participate within student discussions? All of that you really need to think out beforehand. So just think structure of week and calendar it out. What does it look like? And I will tell you, the more you stick to that consistent structure, the better your course is going to go.
I would just add one thing that if you are teaching synchronously, it must be you must identify that, um, and it must be at the time that you've already identified where your class is going to be. The reason being is that may, other classes that these students are taking may be meeting at other times, and you can't conflict with those times. And there's really no easy way for you to identify. I mean, if you can find another time that your students are all available, that you're willing, that they are, and you are all willing to meet, that's up to you. But the official policy is that if you have synchronous sessions, they will meet at the time that you have identified and has been entered into CUNY first. Also, I would just also note that you can have a course that's maybe 60% or 70% asynchronous, and then you have scattered synchronous meetings throughout, and that's fine too. I know a lot of courses are already doing that. But if you're doing that, you need to, in advance, identify which weeks you're doing that in, and you'll have to be assigned a day and time for those meetings to take place. That's coordinated with all of the other classes that are happening. So if you've identified an asynchronous class and you want to do a synchronous session, you're going to have to make it optional, because you didn't notate that in advance, so students don't know that that's happening. So next one.
Yeah, other things to think about. So rubrics for assignments. Again, I think this is especially important within an online course structure. Grading does have to be based on something, and so you have to maybe think about rubrics. If you need sample discussion board rubrics, feel free to email me. I'm happy to give you them, but the more rubrics, the better. Ground rules. This has been talked about a lot, whether students, when they enter a sync session, must have their video on, or whether they can have their video off, or, what online participation is supposed to look like. You do want to establish some ground rules for your class right off the bat. And those ground rules do need to be expressed right off the bat. So the question then becomes, what does attendance look like in these online sync sessions? What does attendance look like in the async course? And it's not going to be like, you can't really keep that in-person attendance policy without expanding on it, because it is going to look different in a sync and async course. The structure for student participation is something to think about. Again, you want to think about three things. You want to think about how the student communicates with you, right? You want to think about how you teach, and you also want to think about how the students are communicating with each other. And that's how you really create a class. So the more structure you have for student-to-student participation, the better. Interestingly, I give choice lectures and choice office hours, and sometimes I'll do a combination of both. And my students like to be together now, especially in quarantine, where some of them are very lonely within their apartments. Some people will hop on to choice office hours, and they just want to hear what other students are thinking. So that student participation piece is really important. Again, how will you engage as the instructor? What does your online teaching presence, as Kenny has said, look like? And that online teaching presence, the reason Kenny put such focus on that is because that online teaching presence is essential. We are in a different classroom right now. It's a virtual classroom. The way we present within that virtual classroom is up to us. But again, it does have to be consistent, and it has to be clear. And we want to be a supportive, nurturing presence in the classroom, especially at this time. Also, does your course provide opportunities for reflection? Whether it be reflection on assignments or reflection on things that they've done maybe outside the particular online structure, or a reflection on how the course is going. Within my online courses, I always do a midterm reflection. So I just ask, like, how's the course going? Do you need me to change, shift, pivot, adjust? What's your favorite part? What's your least favorite part? And I take student feedback, and I'll shift a little with it. And then I do a final reflection as well. So just thin things to think about. Also, I'm very big on multisensory online learning. It should never be like read an article, answer this, read an article, answer that, right? It has to be multisensory. So one thing I ask myself is, does my class have an audio, visual, and kinesthetic component? And if so, how do I combine tools or curate materials so that the class does have an audio, visual, and kinesthetic component? It is really not enough. One of the biggest complaints of online learning is, hey, you know, I could do this myself. I could read an article and answer a discussion board posting myself. So we really have to make a dynamic multisensory structure for our online classes. Again, this involves creative use of projects and screencasts, as well as UDL and accessible instruction.
Could you give me an example of a kinesthetic activity you could do online?
Yeah, sure.
Like playing a musical instrument or something, but I know we're not going to do that.
No, I have my students reflect a lot outside the online structure. So for example, when we were talking about like intelligence tests and memory, I had my students do like a memory exercise, and I just said, spend 15 minutes memorizing this quote however you want it, and then come back online and reflect. So it is kinesthetic for them. Some people sang the quote, some people like made hand motions with the quote, but it was something that they did kinesthetically outside the online classroom and brought back inside. So that's an example of reflecting on something that's more kinesthetic. And I think the additional considerations, Tom brought up office hours, and that's really important. There are many, many ways you can do office hours. As Kenny said, you can create time slots on a Google Doc to better manage office hour time. I tend to just keep office hours open, and students, you know, come in and come out on Zoom. And if sometimes like a student needs privacy, I'll say, hey, can I just pop you in the waiting room, or can you come back in 5 or 10 minutes? And then the student will come back on. And that seems to work very well for me. But again, you kind of have to structure your office hours in a way that feels good to you. And I think a question with adjuncts and full-time faculty is, what are those office hours going to look like? Is it going to be a span of time on Google Meet or Zoom? Is it going to be by appointment, or is it not? So you just have to structure how you are going to create that. And then finally, of course, we want to be ADA compliant. We want to think about accessibility. We want to think about video captioning. We want to check documents to make sure that they comply with best practices. And we want to ensure that all students have equitable access to content. If you are unsure, I've had really great experiences with Hunter's Office of Accessibility. They'll check your, if I have a visually impaired student, I want them to check my PowerPoints and make sure they're very image-based and make sure that I've used the correct PowerPoint theme. So do work with the Office of Accessibility to make sure your class and your course is accessible, and don't forget those captions.
I'm typing into the chat that we have an accessibility checklist on our website. So you can take a look at that, and it will give you some hints about, you know, what to look for and how to mitigate some of that. There's additional resources there, and you can contact the Frankfort Center, and we'll gladly help you work on that. So that's everything. Wow, it's 2 o'clock. Right up to the minute. But I'm happy to stay here as long as you need. We have office hours until 4 o'clock anyway. So, and Gina, I don't know how long you can stay, but if anybody has questions, we can take those questions.
I have a question. Could you say more about video captioning?
Sure. So there are some tools that allow you to do video captioning automatically. One of them is Screencast-O-Matic, has a video captioning tool built right into it, and Screencast-O-Matic is very low cost if you buy the premium version. I think the captioning works on the free version as well. The free version just has like you know, a watermark on it, and there are some limitations to it. But it's a great way to automatically caption a video, and then YouTube also has a functionality for that. You want to be very careful with YouTube though, because you want to protect anything that needs FERPA protection. But if it's simply you lecturing on something and you want to have captions on that, You can use YouTube for that. So you can post it onto YouTube. YouTube will automatically caption it. Then you can go in and you can correct those captions. You can keep it unlisted or make it private and have a password on it if you for protection. If you pay for Vimeo, I think Vimeo has that tool as well, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's not free. I'm hoping that at some point Hunter will invest in a tool like Kaltura, which we have, but it's just not implemented properly, which also has those tools built in. Gina, do you have any?
So yeah, I do use the Vimeo captioning and I love it. Google Slides can also be captioned, and I'm sure you have that, Kenny. I'll put a help doc there as well, which is what I was searching for.
Yeah, and Google Meet also auto captions. So if you're doing a live session, you can use Google Meet instead of Zoom if you need the captioning. There are tools that you can integrate into Zoom for that, but they cost money. Other questions?
If I wanted them to do a journal entry, I could use Google Docs. Is that a good? And then I know we're going outside of Blackboard, going to another medium altogether. But is that, or is there a way I could have them do journal entries on
Sure.
Blackboard itself?
Sure, absolutely. You just want to make sure that if they're doing a journal entry, that each person has a separate Google Doc and they're not sharing it, because the whole point of a journal is that it's private. That's not something you would want to share with the class. So you want to just make sure that you set that up properly.
There's also a journal or blog option in Blackboard that automatically creates a journal or blog function so that they don't have to use Google.
I think there's also like third-party journaling tools. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are tools specifically designed for that purpose.
Can you share some tools that you use that's done well getting more kids to participate in conversation or being back and forth? You mentioned the Mentimeter, Padlet I love. What are some of the other top tools that we could just go up and kind of check out to increase student communication with each other and move away from my lecturing?
I like Flipgrid.
Yeah.
Flipgrid is a video discussion tool. It's completely free. You can create an educator account using your huntersoe.org address or your CUNY First. And it's very easy. Students don't even need to have an account. You just share a join link with them and they can record videos of themselves. They can share their screen. They can do a presentation. There's a lot of things that they can do in there, and it's all asynchronous, so they don't have to be online at the same time.
I'll also say, I incentivize student participation a lot online just to get them used to the format.
How do you do that, Gina?
Yeah, so if I'm doing discussion board questions, I will give points for student response, and I will make them do 2 responses per student. So I am very, very, I tell them that they have to, and I also incentivize it. Sometimes online, people are not used to participating online in the Blackboard or discussion board sort of way. So I do make sure that I create a structure so that they do and they can.
Thank you.
Well, the reason I brought the thing up about the videoing for the first class is for the whole half semester, they had me in the classroom. They knew who I was. They knew, how I explain things. Now we're going full throttle into not having met me. We're going into a full, and so the whole thing, I thought it was important for me. Maybe I could even go over some of the syllabus with them, or just to get things rolling the first day, or some of the basic assignment I might want to give them just to get it started. Goal setting, for example, I might have them do goal setting for the first class, which is a good thing. And when they become teachers, they're going to have to do this in the real world. And so that goes not just for them, but for their chairman, for their principal, right? It goes right up the whole chain of command. They all have to have their goals set for the semester. So it's a good thing to go with for the first day. And I want them to be able to do that so that they can see each other's goals, so they can share that. And that would be one example of how I might use the video the first day, just as an example, as an introductory to where we're going. I mean, and that's, one reason I said, some of the things I can do with them, I have them doing a reading assignment where they're comparing classrooms, and we do a grid and work it out, and then they share each other's pieces. Everybody does a separate piece, and they will share it, and they come up with a completed chart. And so I would like to do this and explain it to them the first day, and that's why I think it's important to have at least that first day exposure to me and see what I look like, and I can see what they look like. Otherwise I'm just talking into a void. So that's just my take on it, and I'm a little nervous about it because I've never used the. I know we make a big thing out of the video and the, but I have never used it. I've never used them actually in the real classroom. I chickened out and I just stayed with the blackboard, and that was the most practical way on. I know I could get through it that way, but now, as I say, we're approaching a complete semester for the first time. Yeah.
I have a question related to that. So I also last semester was able to meet my students in the flesh and have like a number of weeks with them, and then transition to online, a virtual experience. So in terms of like icebreakers and them getting to know each other and getting to know me and sort of, like getting like a real sense of the flavor and the realness of the course in that first week, do you have suggestions or like sources for good ways to approach that first week or so?
Yeah, so I like pride myself, right, on creating this great first week classroom structure where everyone knows each other just like they would in a general classroom. So one of the things I do in an async course, of course in a sync class, you can introduce yourself, you can put people in breakout groups, have them introduce themselves and have fun with that, as Paul said, so that they can see you. And so for an async course, what I'll do is I'll create a video of myself, just saying hi, like just normal me, right? Like, hey, everybody, blah, blah, blah. And then I will ask them in a discussion board or somewhere else to post an introduction of themselves. And I'll always ask them to attach either an image or a video. You could even do like a voice thread, right? So something so that you see something like besides text. A lot of professors use Flipgrid for that purpose. So instead of doing Blackboard, they'll have students go on Flipgrid, create like a funny video, and people love Flipgrid because you could have like all these icons and emojis, and you can respond to each other via video. So don't be afraid to like utilize Flipgrid and tools like that to create this nice like introductory, like, hey, it's me and this is what I look like and this is how I'm here. And you can do that in an async course. My classes are close, and I love that they're close together and that they know each other and that they interact with each other. And one of the reasons why is because I incentivize participation, but also there's that like their video of me, the video of them, they're doing stuff. I get to know them, really know them, like I want to know them.
Yeah.
One thing I have to say, working with student teachers, which I do a lot of, and one of the things they drive me crazy about is what am I going to do the first day? The first day I'm a teacher, what do you do? And I constantly get that question. What do you do the first day? Because of the anxiety of walking in there the first day. So I came up with the whole scheme of things for them to do when they walk in there the first day. So I understand the problems you can have with that.
I think
anxiety.
Yeah, I think our teacher candidates are going to have a lot of anxiety on the first day and are going to need ideas of ways to create first day like activities online for their students so that they do get to know their students. So that's going to be, so creating those ideas and curating that list, Paul, is so great.
Yeah, I really like trying something a little different, like something fun. Show us a picture of something unique about you or your family, or something interesting that we wouldn't know, or playing the game like three truths and a lie or something like that. It's just a fun way to kind of get to know each other. But if you just search for icebreakers or online icebreakers in Google, you'll find more than you could ever, more than you want. ideas, because you can use ideas from like meetings and things like that, especially when you're working with adults. It might be a little bit different for kids, but there's lots and lots and lots of different icebreaker activities that are out there that you can find. And you can even look in some of the protocol books. They'll have some ideas for that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm having a hard time because of the technology. I'm having a little bit of a hard time figuring out how to integrate the technology. But this workshop has been great, and I've been taking a lot of. I actually had the online summer boot camp. But you know, you're dealing with content and you're dealing with a lot of things. It's not easy. I'm a little nervous. I'm definitely a little nervous.
Focus on your goals. I think that's really the best advice that we can give is really every time you have a question in your mind about whether or not something is going to work or something is appropriate, go back to your goals and say, does it meet the goals? Does it serve the goals that I have? And also put yourself in the shoes of your students. Um, every time you look at your course shell, every time you think about how the course is laid out, think about it from the student's perspective and how they're viewing it, and try to put yourself in their place, um, to think about it that way. Because oftentimes we have our own ideas. We are more familiar with the content. We are more familiar. We know what we're thinking about, but is it clear for students? Is it really laid out in a way that students are not going to, I mean, students will always have questions, but you want to try to anticipate as many of the questions as you can.
Also, this semester, I'm also using the platforms for my textbooks because one of the things that I found some really good textbooks. One of them is Cengage, and they're using MindTap, and I'm actually going to be attending a workshop this Friday to show them how to link MindTap with Blackboard. But the digital textbooks are actually good, especially for the fieldwork component. Like last semester, the students couldn't actually go into the field.
Mhm.
So digital textbooks actually have scenarios, real life scenarios with teachers, and they also have other assessment tools, certain things that they can do for the chapter. So I like that. I mean, I think that that's helpful. But it's just I have to start pulling out activities by chapter, and it's not easy because I have to go through the entire textbook and figure out which activities would benefit the students. But I think for the first time around, I think it was easier for me to actually have the platform from the textbook. So the kids are just getting a digital, what they'll have is a digital textbook, and then they'll have the learning access to the learning platforms, which I'm going to have to somehow figure out how to integrate. So I'm hoping that'll make it easy for me.
Well, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end the recording, and you're all more than welcome to stay as long as you like. Gina, I don't, you can leave whenever you need to. You're not obligated to stick around.
No,
Um,
I'm just gonna say goodbye to everyone. I have a meeting at 2:15, so I'm gonna see you guys
okay.
later.
All right. Well,
Bye. I love you. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
thank you, Gina. Thank you so much. And thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for coming.